Okay, we discuss the Parshas Yisro. Yisro was the father of Moshe Rabbeinu. To appreciate who Yisro was, this is the first time we really have a glimpse of Yisro's capacity. The way he processed things, the way he understood things, the way Avram Avinu, he was the first person to recognize God on his own. As the Gemara tells us, the Talmud tells us, the first one to identify Hashem as Adni, as master, was Avram Avinu. Abraham, the founding patriarch of the Jewish people. The whole world denied that he was involved. There was no such thing as divine providence. Everything was deities, was idolatry, paganism. Avram took on the world single-handedly and made more than a dent. He established God's presence in existence. Elokei Avraham. As the Talmud tells us, the Midrash tells us, Hein Hein Merkava, where was God's presence in the world before the building of the Mishkan? The equivalent of the Holy of Holies, where Avram was. That was the first time God came onto terrestrial level since the sin of Adam. When Adam ate of the Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge, he putrefied himself and putrefied existence. God was in the Garden of Eden together with Adam, with Adam. The moment he ingested that fruit, which contained evil, Hashem removed himself from this existence. It was only through Avram's initiatives was God brought back to the terrestrial existence. Where was his location? Where Avram was. He is the chariot. He's God's chariot in this world. That's Elokei Avram. After he passed on, it was Elokei Yitzchak. His location was where Yitzchak was, the second patriarch. Then it's Elokei Yaakov, where Yaakov was. Despite the world denying God's involvement in creation, Avram recognized it. And he kept asking the question. As the Medrash tells us, he saw an illuminated citadel. The equivalent, you have a structure with 1,000 rooms. Every room is illuminated, occupied. So evidently, there is a master of that citadel. And he called out, Miu Balabira, who's the master of the citadel? And there was no answer until finally Hashem said, Ani Balabir, I am the master of this universe. Avram was not willing to compromise his standard of truth for other explanations. And because of that, God, who's the source of all truth, said, I am the Balabir, I am the master of this universe. Because Avram did not compromise his characteristic of truth, the source of all truth, connected with him and said, I am the master of this universe. Now, see something very interesting about Yisro. Yisro was the father of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, what was the story? He was the adopted prince of Egypt. The daughter of Paro, the princess, found him in a box floating in the Nile. She took him out. He became endeared to the Pharaoh, his adopted grandfather. And at the age of 18, he knew he was a Jew. He went out to see how his brethren were faring in the bondage, in the slavery. And he sees an Egyptian beating a Jew, an Egyptian taskmaster. And he understands why he's beating him. The man this Egyptian had defiled his Jew's wife. And when he realized the Jew was aware of it, he started to beat the Jew to death. Moshe immediately springs into action and he kills the Egyptian. When he killed the Egyptian, what happened? There were 2 Jews who noticed it, and they went and informed to the high echelons of the Egyptian government, and he was brought to be put to death. despite the fact he was the adopted son of the king, grandson of the king. Miraculously, he fled with his life. He was able to flee. He fled to Midian. He comes to Midian. He goes to a wellspring, and the first thing he notices, 3 shepherdesses with their flocks, and all of a sudden they're attacked by men shepherds, male shepherds. Moshe again springs into action, fights off the shepherds, and he waters the flocks of these women. And they go back home. And their father asks him, why did you come home so early? So they tell him the story. We're attacked by the male shepherds. This Egyptian, because Moshe was dressed in an Egyptian garb. He came to our aid, he saved us, and he watered the flocks. So Yisro said, why don't you invite him home? Maybe he'd break bread with us. He was looting, maybe take one of you as a wife. Seems to me he's a quality person. Okay? Before we talk about how we noticed that, how it was obvious to Yisro. Yisro was referred to as Kohen Midian. He's the high priest, he's the sheik of Midian. As a world political figure, he was a global figure. That was Moshe's father-in-law, because ultimately when he did come, Tzipora, the daughter of Yisro, became the wife of Moshe. And he had 2 children, 2 sons from her. The Gemara tells us in Sanhedrin that Paro had 3 advisors. One was Bilam, the prophet of the nations, who was a rabid anti-Semite. He could not tolerate the existence of Jews. Then there was Job, Eov. We speak about the sufferings and the travails of Job. And then there was Yisro. These were the 3 advisors to the Egyptian king. Egypt was the height of civilization, the most advanced civilization, the wealthiest power. The armies, the chariot corps, nothing compared in the world to what Egypt was. So if these 3 individuals are his inner circle of advisors, they must be really very astute in their capacity to advise. Bilam and Paro was concerned that maybe a 5th column is developing in Egypt, and ultimately, and the Jews are proliferating like an untold numbers. Every birth, 6 children. Wherever you turn, there are only Jews. He was concerned that ultimately there'll be a 5th column and they'll rebel against us and they'll drive us out of the country. How do we somehow put a cap on it? How do we control them? Bilam says very simple. Enslave them. And demand quotas which are not humanly possible to meet. That's how you do it. Paro heard it, said it's a good idea. I think that's what we're going to do. When Yisro heard this, it says he fled in protest from Egypt. He fled. He will not be associated with such a miscarriage of justice. Take an innocent people. We have no proof that ultimately they're going to be rebellious. Just to the contrary. Their ancestor saved Egypt at the most dire moment. There was a famine. And only due to what he oversaw the country, he gathered all the wealth of the world. And Egypt only exists today because of him. Do you take his family? Innocent people, there was nothing proven that they ever did anything or they ever considered doing anything. Negative. And enslave an innocent people. A level of enslavement that if they don't meet the quotas, you're going to beat them to death. And they're going to be tortured. Yisro cannot be associated with such a miscarriage of justice. It's corrupt. He's out of there. Job, did not condone it, but he remained silent. Didn't say a word. Eov was a tzaddik, although he was not a Jew. Hashem comes to Eov and says, Yisro fled in protest. Why did you remain silent? And he said to Hashem, and if I would have fled, would have made a difference? It wouldn't have made a difference. Yisro fled, did it make a difference? And if I would have fled, it wouldn't make a difference. So there would have been no value to flee. Therefore, I remained silent. What happened? Soon afterwards, we speak about the suffering and the travails of Eov. He was a very wealthy man. He had great numbers of family. They all died. He lost his wealth. He was a healthy man. He suffered tremendously, physically. Many things. To test his faith in God. When you have everything, you sing God's praises. When you're on top of the mountain. But when everything just collapses on you, and it's a level of suffering not to be even be able to relate to, and to remain, to stay the course, and still believe in God, this is like exceptional. But that was Eov. So God is Eov. Why did you protest? You should have left in protest. He said, because if it would have happened, if I wouldn't have made a difference. Okay, so Hashem says, I hear what you're saying. All of a sudden, the suffering comes on Eov. Eov is suffering to such a degree, physically, emotionally. It's beyond the pale, and he's screaming and writhing in pain, from pain. Hashem says to Eov, why are you crying? Why are you screaming? He says, because I'm in pain, which is intolerable. So Hashem says to Eov, you mean to say when you're in pain, you scream? Although the screaming doesn't alleviate the pain. But when you're in pain, you scream. This, what I'm telling you now, is the Brisker Rav says this. So Hashem says to Eov, you told me the reason why you remained silent, because leaving, although it would be a protest, it wouldn't have made a difference. But factually, if it's intolerable and you'd be pained by this, you would have fled. Whether the protest would have helped or not. You couldn't be associated with such an injustice if you would have been in pain. So that you were able to tolerate that injustice means you were not in pain. Although the Jews and innocent people were going to be enslaved and tortured and inhumanly put under that mountain to be crushed, you were in pain. Because if you would have been pained, you would have screamed. That means you would have fled. Not fleeing means you were not in pain. Now I taught you, when you're in pain, you scream. That's the story of Job. That was the measure for measure. That's the reason why he was tested in this context, to communicate that message to him loud and clear. Yisro was pained. It was intolerable pain. And he fled. That was his protest. Now, let's understand what was Egypt, who was Pharaoh. Pharaoh was the leading monarch in the world. Do you know what happens if you offend or slight such a person? The ramifications, the consequences could be unending. But Yisro, because of his integrity and standard of fairness and truth and justice, it was irrelevant what the consequences of that would be. That was a standard of truth and justice. That kind of injustice, regardless of what happens, he could be the king of Egypt. Regardless, he's offended. It's irrelevant. I cannot be associated with this kind of justice. And he fled. So by fleeing, what did he demonstrate? He demonstrated something very similar to Moshe. As Moshe, when he killed the Egyptian, he was the advocate in the palace for the Jewish people. And he understood, as much as he looked in every direction, not to be noticed. You never know. And factually, he was informed on. But it didn't make a difference. Because when there's this level of injustice taking place, that is your standard, you respond, no matter what, regardless of what the consequences are going to be. And therefore, Moshe killed the Egyptian. That was his standard of truth. That's the justice. That's his measuring rod in terms of what should be, what's unacceptable. He flees. Where does he go? He goes to the vineyard. His demeanor, his attire, he looks like an Egyptian. How do you know he looks like an Egyptian? Because when the daughters of Yisro shared with their father, they said, an Egyptian saved us. An Egyptian man saved us. So the question is this: you're a fugitive. He fled from Egypt. Miraculously, he was able to flee to save his life. He named the second son Eliezer. Why? Paro. Although the tentacles of Paro were all over the world, God saved him from the sword of Paro. That he was not caught, he was not found out. But if you're a fugitive and you're fleeing for your life and you look like an Egyptian, now you see these women being attacked. You know what you do? Keep a low profile. Stay under the radar. How do you become so obvious? Egyptian kills, saves the daughters of the leading sheikh of Midian. Could you imagine? That's tomorrow's news. A word gets out. Moshe, your behavior is irresponsible. We know what the answer is. A person who lives that standard of truth, you never compromise truth for any reason. Your existence has to maintain that standard. Anything less than that is not acceptable. That's Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, why did God reveal himself to Avram, who was the founding patriarch of the Jewish people? He entered into dialogue with all the leading thinkers of his generation. They gave him answers. They were not acceptable to him. He wasn't going to compromise his truth, his standard of emes, unless it is the right answer. And he came and he sees Bira Dolekis. There's a citadel which illuminated. And he had a question. Mi Bala Bira. Who is the master of this universe? And Hashem says, Ani Bala Bira. I am. So because Avram was not willing to compromise his standard of truth, to be able to live with the question, the source of all truth reveals himself. He says, I am the master. So why did he merit to have a relationship with the source of all truth, which is absolute? Because he's not willing to compromise that standard. Even it meant going into a kiln. He was given an ultimatum: either bow to the idol, go into the kiln. I will not. That's a compromise on truth. To value my life more than God's will, I go into the kiln. I will not live or do anything which represents falsehood for the sake of bettering myself, saving myself. I'm willing to die for the sake of truth. The Talmud tells us that that the signet of God is truth. That's God's signet. The Torah is truth on the absolute level. King Solomon says in Mishlei and Proverbs, Emes kenev al timkor. Acquire truth, don't sell it. I once mentioned the name of the Maharal of Prague. In Hebrew, the word emes is truth. If you take the aleph off emes, what's left? Mem tov, mes, death, worthlessness. What is aleph in the Hebrew alphabet? What does it represent? Something which is infinitesimal. If you take off even the smallest amount, detract from truth, what you left with nothing. Avram was willing to die for that. He lived for that. Nothing less than the absolute. And that's why he merited to have the relationship with Hashem, who's the absolute. No compromise of truth. That's emes. The Torah is emes. Torah is Hashem Timimo. The Torah is perfect. Why aren't you permitted to add to the Torah or detract from the Torah? Because something which is perfect, adding is detracting. And detracting, definitely, it's not whole anymore. Because that's truth. Moshe Rabbeinu, because he was the man of truth, as when he killed the Egyptian, and when he fled to Midian, and he went high profile, for the sake of what? For the sake of justice. He was the one who merited to be the conduit, to be the liaison, to be the medium between Hashem and the Jewish people, to receive the Torah. Because only he, at his level, was he able to have that relationship with God, because he represents the ultimate level of truth on the absolute level. So he, being at that level, Only he's qualified to receive the Torah, which is truth in the absolute, and to have relation with Hashem, which is the absolute. He was the only one who prophesied ponim el ponim, face to face. Why doesn't any other prophet prophesize in the wake state? Only Moshe. Because the physicality represents something which is not in sync with God. Why does a person sin? We sin because of our physicality, not because of our soul. We're inclined to many things because of our physical makeup, the earthiness of our physical makeup. If that's the case, when a prophet prophesies, which is having a connection with the divine presence, it cannot have relationship with the body. Because the body itself is represents something which is not truthful. Because the tendencies and the inclination to do evil, to sin, is not in sync with God. The neshama, the soul is, because the soul is pure. Moshe Rabbeinu prophesied in the wake state, because even his physicality was in sync with God. He never compromised God because of his physicality. Moshe Rabbeinu's level of humility was what? Nachnu mo. There's not a trace of himself. Every fiber of his being, his physicality, is only for the sake of God. If that's the case, even his physicality was able to have a relation with God, with truth on the absolute level for that reason. No other prophet had that level of humility. There was always that aspect of self. There's me, and there's me. Once there's a me, there's some level of entitlement at some level, which automatically compromises God. Moshe Rabbeinu had no compromise. Talmud tells us in Sanhedrin that a court, when they adjudicate a case, they should try to encourage both defendants to agree to mediation rather than justice. Justice is innocent guilty. Mediation means we mediate, you give a little, you take a little, but both people walk out basically satisfied. And the way it's expressed in the Talmud, mitzvah lasos pshara. There's a mitzvah to encourage mediation. Aaron, a Kohen, Moshe's brother, he's depicted in Pirkei Avos as Oev Shalom V'Rodev Shalom. He loved peace, he pursued peace. Whenever he would adjudicate, it was always with the context of mediation. Because there's mitzvah lasos pshar, there's a mitzvah to encourage it. Moshe Rabbeinu never was involved in mediation. What was Moshe's position? Yaakov hadin sahor. If you have a mountain, and the mountain's the way of justice, you know what you do? You obliterate the mountain. You pierce the mountain, do away with the mountain. So the question is, if there's a mitzvah to mediate, because both defendants walk away basically satisfied, and it's a mitzvah, why was his approach, if the law is one way and the mountain interferes, you just wipe away the mountain, you destroy the mountain. Why? The answer is because Moshe Rabbeinu, his essence was truth. Truth cannot compromise. Everybody else, we compromise truth. Because the times we sin. We do because we want to do. That's the justification. I'm entitled because it's not so terrible. We always have our way of seeing it, as they say in the modern world, which this already, even this saying, everybody has that spin, so to say. Moshe Rabbeinu had no spin. He saw it only one way. It's either right or wrong. If it's wrong, it's unacceptable. Every one of us, we see through colored lenses. Because of that, we don't live a life of absolute truth. Therefore, for the sake of peace between the two defendants, encourage mediation. That's why Moshe was Moshe, and every other person, the obligation is to encourage mediation for that reason. Now, there's a concept that environment is crucial to one's behavior. You live in an environment which is a very positive environment, quality environment. People live righteous lives, and you're exposed to them. Ultimately, you'll be a beneficiary of that environment. That you will also gravitate in that direction due to the influences, even though it's almost like osmosis. It's subliminal influences. But just watching, being associated at some level, you begin changing. But if you live in a negative environment where people are not good people, ultimately, subliminally, the person will change for the negative. And it's depicted in the terms of Chazal, Tov the tzaddik, Tov the shcheno. As the tzaddik is in a good place, his neighbor is also a beneficiary of that. Because he's a neighbor of a tzaddik. Oy l'rosh, oy l'shcheno. Woe to the evil one, woe to his neighbor. There's some kind of subliminal influence the Russia has on his neighbor. The neighbor doesn't even realize that level of association is compromising his whole essence to take on this evil demeanor. But that's what happens. Over time, there is that influence. Okay? Moshe flees to Midian. He marries the daughter of Yisro. Since not only he was a neighbor of Yisro, he was the son-in-law of Yisro. Yisro originally was a pagan. Yisro ultimately, the Medrash says, he worshipped every deity. And he came to the conclusion they're all false, and the only true belief is monotheism. Nothing exists outside of monotheism. Nobody ever came to that conclusion, other than Avraham Avinu. Yisro came to this conclusion. Why was he able? Was he the most brilliant person who walked the face of the earth? The answer is no. It's because he was exposed to Moshe Rabbeinu. And we say, Tov l'tzaddik, Tov l'shcheno. It's good for the tzaddik, because he's a tzaddik, and it's even a beneficiary of that as his neighbor. Yisro was a father-in-law. Do you know what it means to be that closely connected to the source of all holiness? Moshe Rabbeinu was the most perfect human being ever to be born on the face of this earth. And that was his son-in-law. As a result of that, Yisro became a different person. On that subliminal level, and eventually they had conversations. As a result of that, assuming a posture of truth, which anyway he had that back in Egypt, before Moshe Rabbeinu fled, when he was the advisor, and when in protest he fled. The basis for that open protest was his streak of truth. That was his backbone, truth, regardless of what the consequences are going to be. I will not tolerate it. And on top of that, now he has Moshe Rabbeinu to be the influencer in his life. So now when you hear something, the splitting of the sea, 250 miracles took place at the sea. The war with the Amalekites after the split of the sea. When he heard this, he was taken away. He was like overwhelmed with a level of understanding. Although he was the Sheikh of Midian, he had all the glory in the world. He says, you know something? Now hearing that took place and God did that on behalf of the Jews, I'm out of here. I'm leaving everything behind. I'm going out to the desert, a wilderness, to become part of the Jewish people, to accept the Torah. You're giving up all your glory, all your goodwill. Years, you're a Midianite. Give you an example. Person works a whole life, accumulates $50 million. It's a lot of money. At least at one time it was a lot of money. And all of a sudden he's offered a deal. $1 billion piece of property for $50 million. So he worked hard his whole life for the $50 million, and he had the deal vetted, proven, it's a real deal. And you just have to sign over the papers, and you can flip the $1 billion deal in 24 hours. Person says, are you out of your mind? $50 million is a lot of money. You worked your whole life for it. But the man says, but do you know what the exchange is going to be? $1 billion piece of property, which I could flip in 24 hours and have $1 billion cash. You don't get it. Because he appreciates the nature of the deal. Yisro, because of his background, of what truth is, and what spirituality is, due to the influence of Moshe Rabbeinu. When he heard of the splitting of the sea, he processed it different than everybody in the world. Everybody was aware of the splitting of the sea. But when Yisro heard this, he couldn't restrain himself. He gave it all up. What did he give up? Anybody else says, you're out of your mind. How do you give up? How do you give all that glory up? You know what that's worth? It's a pittance compared to where I'm going. Because of his capacity to appreciate what that is, that the creator of the universe is giving his Torah to his chosen people. I want to be part of that. But nobody else had that capacity to even appreciate it because they didn't have that streak of that quality of truth, because they didn't live a life of truth. They lived a life of self-indulgence, a life of entitlement, although they weren't entitled. That's what the Yishma Yisro, what did he hear? What tidings did he hear? That he was willing to give it all up. The splitting of the sea and the war with the Amalekites, which we'll discuss in a moment. Yisro was a very astute person. Rashi explains that after he fought off the shepherds and his daughters come home, and the father says, why don't you come home early? They tell him the story that this Egyptian man watered our flocks, fought off these attackers. He says, why don't you invite him home? What did Yisro see so special in whoever this person was? So Rashi explains that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he first came to Midian, he set himself down by a well. When he sat by that well, the water rose towards him. And his daughter shared it with their father. And he knew that when Yaakov Avinu was at the well, the water rose towards him. Water naturally flows downward. But for Yaakov, it flowed upward. When he heard that this person had that ability, just the water being exposed to him, the water rose towards him, he knew this was a descendant of he was a Jew. And he was a special Jew. So he says to his daughters, how did you leave him behind? So he knew he was special because he was a Jew, because the water rose towards him, which is a miracle. The Maharal of Prague says something differently. In his work, Vurs Hashem, says something very nice, profound. People have to have a good eye to understand something, to see something in terms of its innate worth. Moshe Rabbeinu goes, he has for no reason to get involved in the fray here. And he fights off the shepherds. He could have put his life in danger. He could have been killed. But as I said, for the sake of truth, he fought them off. After he fights them off, let them water their own flocks. He watered the flocks. Maybe because they were traumatized, he watered them. They go home. If somebody does such a heroic act, selfless act, everybody has it, even though you don't want to be compensated for it materially. But at least you want people to appreciate and understand what your sacrifice was. Even special person. You know what Moshe should have done? He should have followed them home and said, by the way, I'm delivering your daughters in a safe situation. I just want to tell you, I was happy to do it. No more than that. You know what Moshe Rabbeinu did? Didn't accompany the daughters back. He had no interest in any acknowledgement. It's unheard of. A person making this level of sacrifice, not even to want to be acknowledged. He never saw such an act, such a person who has such humility. This is beyond the pale, this humility. Immediately says, this person is one of a kind of person. Go back, invite him. That's the kind of son-in-law I want. Yisro being the ultimate statesman, world statesman. He was from the inner circle of Paro to be advisor. He had a good eye. But he only had that eye that was so impressive because of humility, because he himself possessed the characteristic of truth. When you live a life of truth and you want truth, that's why he found that all the deities were false. And that's why when he saw something to be special, he recognized it was special. Other persons say it's meekness, that he's a fool. He could have had it and he didn't. He should have gone for it. Moshe was Arabian who wasn't interested in going for it. He saw this as a quality, not as a failing. Many years ago, I think it was Dershowitz wrote the book, Chutzpah. You know how you get ahead in this world? Chutzpah. So you have a person that's refined, a tzaddik, who has humility. He's a weak-spined guy. He's meek. Rather than seeing it as quality, they see it as meekness. Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humble person who ever walked the face of the earth. But yet, when it came to break the first set of tablets, he smashed them. He didn't console with anyone. Humility has nothing to do with meekness or weakness. Humility has to do with whatever I am, I'm supposed to be there because that's what I'm supposed to be. Therefore, there's no therefores. I'm this, therefore what? There's no therefore what's. If you have that level of humility, there's no trace of it in Moshe Rabbeinu. Therefore, he had no reason to go. What am I going to acknowledge? Truth demanded that kind of behavior. That's emulating God. The signet of God is truth. A person works in a company, and I always say this. Comes to bonus time, he doesn't get a bonus. And he goes and meets with the person who evaluates one's reason to get or not to get. He says, why not to get a bonus? He says, I worked for this company for 40 years. I never embezzled. Don't you think I deserve a bonus for not embezzling? He says, you embezzled, but that's what you weren't supposed to embezzle. You don't get a bonus for something that you're supposed to be. You get a bonus that you did something beyond what you're supposed to be. Truth, you're supposed to be truthful. Because that's what God demands. Finished. That's where it begins. That's where it ends. So to be acknowledged for doing something which is in sync with who you are, that's what I'm supposed to be. There's no reason to go after them to receive any level of acknowledgement. And Yisro recognized this. Mashmo Shemobo. The whole world heard the same thing. Not one person other than Yisro came. Because everybody saw it through their own lens. It's amazing. It's this. Ringling Brothers Three-ring circus. The world's a circus. No, you can afford the ticket, you go to the circus. After the circus, what do? If being exposed to the elephants and everything, you take a shower and you change your clothing. That's what you do when you get back from the circus. That's about what it's worth. It's interesting. It's unusual. These kinds of people, it's nothing interesting, unusual. It is what it is. They read the script right. As I said, you see the handwriting on the wall, but people don't see the handwriting because they're not interested in what, they're not interested in truth. When you're confronted with truth, they can't deal with it. They flee from truth. Every express, you're too straight. Because you're so straight, there's no leeway to do what I want to do. The deal is such a straight deal. And the only way you can make money on a deal, you have to be slightly crooked. But as long as it's within the law, it's okay. Not if you're a person of integrity and truth. It's not truthful within the law, without the law. I'm not interested. That was Moshe Rabbeinu. That was Yisro. We find by the giving of Torah Sinai, the world quaked to such a level, the nations of the world believed the world was coming to an end. What do? They come running to Bilam. He's the prophet of the nations of the world. And they say, Bilam, God is destroying the world. He says, not possible. They said, why not? Because he made a covenant, time of the great flood, he's not going to destroy the world. So they said to Bilam, but the covenant was with water, but maybe now he's destroying it with fire. He says, you people are a bunch of fools. Don't you realize Hashem Ozlam Oyite? Don't you realize God is giving his power to his people, which is the Torah? They said, if that's the case, Hashem Yivorach Samo V'Shalom. Let God bless his people with peace. We're out of here. Could you imagine? They come to a level of understanding. God has come from heaven to earth. That's why the world is quaking to the point they feel the world's coming to an end. That's how they're being shaken up. There's no rock to hide under. And once they feel we're in a safe place, we're out of here. But if you have that level of clarity, what do you mean you're out of here? You should embrace it. You should become part of the Jewish people. You know what the answer is? They're not looking for truth. We're looking for the way out and have the cake and eat it. That's what they're looking for. But if you're looking for truth, of course you gravitate. And you go there. The story of Ruth and Naomi. The story, we read it on Shavuos, the book of Ruth. There were two sisters, Ruth and Orpah. Naomi was the mother-in-law. Her husband dies. The sons die, which were the husbands of these two women. And Naomi heard that the famine in the plains of Judah is no longer, she's going back. So they said, we're both going back with you. Naomi says to her daughter-in-law, I'm an old lady. There's no point. What, are you going back? Go back to to your families. They were both princesses. Orpah said, okay, I'm going back. She cried. She embraced her mother-in-law and she left. Ruth wouldn't leave under any circumstance. Where you shall go, I shall go. Where you will lie, I shall lie. Where you shall be buried, I shall be buried. I'm not leaving. I'm not detaching myself from you under any circumstance. And she came back. She converted. She's the grandmother of David HaMelech, of King David. Why did the other one, after she was convinced it's not for her, she left? Ruth says, no, under no circumstance. I have an understanding of what it is. No matter what it costs, whatever the sacrifice is, I'm in it. Ultimately, I wanted to convert. As much as she tried to discourage her. And we learned the laws of conversion from Ruth. You only discourage the person up to a point, but once you see you can't, then you allow the person to convert. That's Ruth. Ruth HaMoaviyah, Ruth the Moabite. Who was Ruth? Ruth had a level of clarity. Where did that clarity come from? Because she wanted glory. You come back as a convert. What are you? You don't even have an identity. You're not even considered one of the tribes. But for the sake of truth, I want to be part of the Jewish people. The world that Kabbalas Torah. They heard truth. But we're not interested. As long as we're in a safe place, the world's not coming to an end, and we can continue our lives as we live them. Adultery, incense, perversion, indulgence, everything under the sun. If we could continue, we prefer that. But what about truth? They don't know what the word means. In God we trust. That's what it's about. MS. What does MS mean? Truthful. We find that this quality of truth, even Yaakov at the time that he came to take the blessings which were rightfully his from Yitzhak, and he impersonated his brother, and his mother was involved because it came through a prophecy. He has to come take the birthright. At that moment, he said to his mother, but I'm a smooth-skinned person. My brother's hairy. The moment my father touches me, he knows that I'm not my brother. Instead of receiving a blessing, it'll be a curse. She says, we'll work it out. So she puts the hides on his arms, on his chest, and she prepares delicacies, and he brings it quickly to his father. So Yitzhak was taken aback. He came so quickly. So he says, are you my firstborn Esav? That's the question Yitzhak asked Yaakov. He said, I am, pause, Esav is your firstborn. So the way it was stated, it could be understood, I am Esav, your firstborn. That's not the way Yaakov said it. I am, comma, Esav is your firstborn. I am who I am. You know who your firstborn is? That's Esav. What difference does it make? If the way it's being understood, it's not being understood as it's supposed to be understood, why are you so careful how you say the words out of your mouth that it could be interpreted that to be truthful? Because you only have to compromise truth up to a point. If you could compromise it to a lesser degree, you don't compromise it totally. Therefore, Yaakov being Yaakov Ishtam Yoshibolim, he's the man of Torah. And Torah is emes. Titain emes liYaakov, we say. Give truth to Yaakov. Yaakov represents truth because the Torah is truth. So to whatever degree he could compromise it to a lesser degree, Yaakov doesn't compromise it. So even when he spoke, the words that he articulated were truthful words. It was only the way Yitzchak understood it. He understood it as Yaakov wanted him to understand it. But did he say a lie out of his mouth? No, the words were not a lie. For that same reason. Many years ago, there was somebody came to Yad Avram, and he belonged to a Reformed temple in Scarsdale with someone else, and he worked part of an insurance agency. And ultimately, they used to put on tefillin every day, these two. One became almost totally observant. The other one didn't move much. So the other one, who did not move much, to become more observant, he prided himself that he studied from the Stone Chumash. From the Stone Chumash. So he says, yeah, I believe everything in the Torah is true. So I took a Stone Chumash, which is published by Art Scroll. I said, his name was Peter. I said, Peter, do you believe everything in this book is true, is truthful, is truth? He said, definitely. I said, are you a man of truth? Do you live by truth? Definitely. And he prided himself that he was ethical, moral, truthful. I said, if this book is all true and you're truthful, that means you should abide by everything that's stated in this book. He says, definitely. I said, let me ask a question. Do you eat crab cakes? He says, yeah. I said, but if it says in this book, you're not supposed to eat crab cakes, and this book is a book of truth, well, how do you eat crab cakes? The answer is very simple. You feel you're a truthful person, but anything which doesn't fit your profile of the way you live your life, you don't see that as being untruthful. It's not for you. It may be truthful in its own right, but it has no relevance to you. Within my own little cocoon, I live truth. What I pick and choose to be yes or no. That's the way people live their lives. I'm ethical, moral. When it comes to the IRS, it's a different story. My account says there's a legal loophole there. I could not declare it. When you go through customs, just take it on your handbag or pack it in your bag. When they go check it through, they won't even know the difference. That's being ethical and moral. You don't want to be caught. Because if you're caught, you're going to be you're going to be rated on the computer. Next time you go through, they're going to check you. So you got to be careful. But that's being truthful. The reason why Yisro had the capacity, because he has a long record of being a truthful person, because he had that lens, which only wanted to see truth, he saw truth. If you have no interest, you're interested in seeing one thing. What's going to get you ahead? What's going to benefit you? And if not, you can hear the splitting of the sea, and it doesn't really make a difference. And you just go about doing what you want and living your life as you choose. I'm going to stop here.